I think one of the big things they said is that you would claim that Fauci masterminded the entire cover-up. And Science Magazine said, and I'm probably paraphrasing, but I think we've got it right, it's not clear which fraud and what cover-up Mikovits is talking about exactly. There's no evidence that Fauci was involved in a cover-up or that anyone was paid off with funding from him or his institute. No one has ever been charged with fraud in relation to Mikovits' allegations. How do you respond to that?
So Tony Fauci funded. So Francis Collins said, we need to do a large multi-center study to confirm what we were saying. And as soon as our paper was published, because of the implications of a contaminated blood supply, just as in HIV/AIDS, as soon as our paper was published, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which is not under the direction of Tony Fauci, started doing studies to develop tests to identify the virus in the blood supply. So the cover-up was the way the studies were done in Science, the journal, and by the other investigators, not only by the NIAID of XMRV contaminating the blood supply and the vaccines, but because that study was what the multi-center study we started the study design on November 4th of 2010. It was that study that Francis Collins ordered to be done when the London blood supply, where I got control samples, had 4% of the controls positive, as opposed to, and here in our original paper, we said 3.75. In Harvey Alter's confirmatory paper that was published in mid-2010, they showed 7%. So the big issue here and why Fauci spearheaded the cover-up is because Francis Collins, his boss, the head of the NIH, all of the institutes said, we must fund a multi-center study to look at the disease associations. And this was the study that was corrupted by the study director of the study, Ian Lipkin, and I do have a slide I can show how that works as far as excluding the appropriate patients and then limiting the findings that we were able to do based on wording really that had nothing to do with the study. So you can see how the study was corrupted. So and this was, I was held as a fugitive, a felony fugitive from justice, arrested in November 18th, 2011. And I do have the quote from Science, the journal, that in fact says federal agents were the only ones who could have. There was no warrant, there was no arrest, there was nothing. But that was when I was supposed to be participating in the validation study, doing the isolation, doing the things I did as the principal investigator on the original study. But Tony Fauci said, put that felony from fugitive from justice at the NIH, at the NCI, in the laboratory. So I couldn't do the study because I was called a fugitive from justice. So I did virology by telephone and tried the best I could because I knew we would get positives in the study, because even though 3 of the centers or 4 of the centers were not valid patients according to the disease signature, that's the publication I also sent that you could post. There's a disease signature, just as we see in COVID-19, of these viruses. So
okay, is this when you're being held without charges and what they dispute, or is this a different piece? Because
no, that's when I was being held in 2011.
Okay.
I was held in jail for 5 days, as we discussed before. All the while, our paper is being force retracted from the journal, because they've lost confidence in me. Oh, now I'm supposedly stealing things. Now I'm supposedly But what Tony Fauci did, he stopped the validation study. One, he kept me out of the labs. And two, and I show Harold Varmus there because the study design, Harold corrupted the study design by ordering that the infectious clone, which was not what we isolated, that infectious synthetic clone, which way overgrew the samples, he insisted some samples be spiked with that. And so then it would have said contamination. So at every level of the people in that picture, there's a corruption and a cover-up. So when against all odds, we would have validated our original paper, Tony Fauci stopped the study, said we're wasting too much money. He applied he directed Ian Lipkin, the senior investigator on the paper, to apply a statistical program to say anything we were finding in that last cohort was in fact contamination, whiwhich it absolutely was not.
Okay, so this is how they are covering it up. They obviously said there's no evidence and there's no funding and no one's been charged in fraud. And you're saying, yeah, this is how they did it. So basically, you're explaining how they did it in a way that wouldn't show evidence that Fauci did this, and so I see what you're saying. All right, so you're showing how they did it with this explanation. And that's obviously something that Science Magazine is saying, oh, there's none of this and this and that, because they're actually not addressing your specific arguments.
Yeah, they're not. And in fact, I can, in that paper, so then they link in that article the press conference. So here's how they corrupted the study. We were only allowed, and this I'll go back to the slide for just a minute for this. We were only allowed to say, because of the title of our paper, and this makes it a lot easier, and this is how manipulation of data happens, because we were only allowed to say that, and it matters for the title of this paper so you can understand. So our paper originally said detection of see the word an infectious retrovirus called XMRV. Again, DeRisi and Silverman had identified sequences in prostate cancer patients, but they never isolated it. And so that's what's critically important. So an infectious retroviruses that they had called, they said they discovered it, they held a patent on it, they made a synthetic infectious molecular clone, which is standard procedure, but the virus hadn't been isolated. So it says of an infectious retroviruses. And our paper, I highlighted there, taken together, these demonstrate for the first direct isolation of infectious XMRV, it's not plural at the time, from humans, and implicate a role for XMRV in infection in the pathogenesis of CFS. So we didn't say it caused it. We said it implicates a role for it, and that's the original abstract of this paper. Well, 6 months later, and it should have been shorter, Harvey Alter confirmed our studies.
Okay. This is good. This is going very into the detail, and I still have about 6 or 7 of the things I just want to get your counters with Science Magazine. Can you?
Okay, so let's do that. But that tells you, because that's a real key. The title of that paper is how they twisted the study. We were only allowed to find VP62 because Bob Silverman said it was VP62. It was that sequence that we isolated. And in fact, they made the mistake. They forced in sequencing our strains, it wasn't VP62. It never was. They held the patent. So we, in fact, had discovered and done the real isolation of a new family of viruses. And this is how it got all confused, because we were only allowed in the confirmation study to say XMRV VP62, and that virus was a cloning mistake. It was synthetic. It never was in vivo.
So this allowed that further cover up to happen because of this specific point that was made here. Okay, that makes sense. And now I also see
cover up.
Okay, and now I also see, without you being specific, it's very easy for not only mainstream media, but even a magazine like Nature to kind of gloss over this.
Correct. And twist it because they're not virologists and mainstream. And in our book, Plague of Corruption, everybody can wake up because of the way Kent Hecken Lively writes it as a 6th grade science teacher and understanding. And so it's the understanding, it's how the words are twisted.